Set. 4, 3, 1.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Sunday Morning Quarterback. Today, we are three pastors who love ministry, leadership, and sports. It is great to see you today. John, is the weather slowing down there in Virginia?
We still have rain, but I have power back. Praise the Lord. Praying for those that are still without power.
Man, it is crazy in the Carolinas and the South Georgias. Dad, what's going on down there in Nashville, in Music City?
Rain is done. Clouds are moving away in about an hour or two, so excited to see blue skies.
Nice. Well, we are coming in from a good football weekend, and, church, we're kind of like right in the middle of that pre-Thanksgiving as we enter into October. And so up front, we're going to talk about a little bit of NFL weekend, a little bit of college football coming out of the big Georgia and Alabama game. Then on the back end, we're going to talk a little bit about just church attendance trends, of when some of the peak moments are, and how things have changed and progressed, and how we as pastors can be always looking forward and being currently relevant with how we're going about ministry. So let's jump in, fellas. The big game of the weekend. We're going to start here. Georgia, Alabama. It was a first half blowout. I almost turned the game off, but man, it got wild in the end. And John, let me say this disclaimer. So I called my dad. Like, are you watching this? Are you watching this? He's like, what are you talking about? I flipped the channel. And he flipped back. He's like, what happened? What happened? He flipped away for 5 minutes. And in 5 minutes, there were 2 touchdowns. Man, the game went wild. John, what did you think about the game versus the 2 Giants?
Well, I was watching it in a hotel room with my family because the power was out. And so the girls were asleep on one side, Michelle's asleep on the other side. I'm just trying to contain my excitement without jolting the entire bed and waking everybody up. Man, what a game. Just to see, first couple minutes, you're like, Alabama's just going to roll. What's happening here? And then, they made a game out of it. Surprisingly, I think maybe they got coasted a little bit, started playing a little soft and run the ball, but man, they responded when the bell came, and it was a great game to watch.
Dad, what'd you think?
I think it was a great game to watch, but I don't know what to take from it. This was the second time that Georgia didn't play great, particularly in the first half. Alabama came out gangbusters, but then they, like John said, they kind of just coasted and barely hung on. And so in the grand scheme of things, I think you've got 2 good teams, but I want to see Ohio State. I want to see Texas, play these guys. So, I just don't know. And it's hard to even see how Texas is playing right now because they're without their leader. And so I think this is a pick-em year. I think anybody who gets hot, who can continue to build and get better this year, I think has got a good chance of winning it. So it's going to be fun to see.
Yeah, I think a few things in the first half. You started to see, okay, Kalen DeBoer's system coming from that Washington system was really helping Jalen Milroe, and so I think from that perspective, it's helping. And then in the second half, you saw him kind of let off the gas a little bit. But man, talk about draft status. Carson Beck's value was down, and then it shot back up. And so, at least here in Georgia, they're not quite sold on him, although he redeemed himself a little bit. But man, let me tell you, Georgia's schedule. So they've got Auburn, they've got Mississippi State, then they've got at Texas, and then they've got at Ole Miss, and then the following week they've got Tennessee. So, I mean, they've got 3 more just tough games. And so in the grand scheme of the playoffs, you have to think, how many can they lose to still get in the playoff? One thought is, too, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but there's the potential chance that Georgia, Alabama could potentially play 3 times. If both of them were to sneak in the SEC championship, face each other in the playoffs. So very interesting. But, I think Georgia is learning that sustained success that Nick Saban mastered is hard. When you win those championships, you're putting people in the draft year in and year out. Also, you're losing coaches. You're having to retool every year. I think that's tough. But I'm happy for Kalen DeBoer. That way he was able to get that win in front of Saban, in front of the Alabama fans to kind of gain that respect. But, man, Georgia, Kirby Smart, I mean, they've done a great job, but 1-6 against Alabama. That one has to sting. And then for everybody else, it's like, all right, the first year post Nick Saban, and you still couldn't beat him. That's got to be a tough one to swallow. But, hey, let's jump over to the NFL. I know we had a few other things going on in college. USC eked one out. Colorado eked one out. But man, yesterday was an interesting day in the National Football League. You had some upsets or some fringe teams that are good, but they're 0-2 or 1-2 and having to really fight to kind of stay relevant. John, what stuck out to you yesterday?
I was watching haphazardly in between, figuring out power and cleaning out the refrigerator. And honestly, I watched Fields put together a game there. Flacco came in though for the Colts and actually played a really good game. In fact, I think the Pittsburgh would still be without a loss if they were still playing. Richardson dropping back, and then you got to make Baker Mayfield.
Yep.
He's sporadic. He's going to have some good games and bad games. But man, when he is playing well, he plays incredibly well. Also, it's great to see him and Tom Brady go back and forth a little bit about who was having fun and who was too serious during the thing. Tom Brady just owns a whole lot of trump cards, and so it's hard to argue on that end. But it was a fun game to watch.
Dad, what stuck out?
I'm with John, but I'm going to go to the flip side of that game, the Eagles. We saw the debacle that is the Eagles last year, and it is beginning to smell there again. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think he and his quarterback are again not on the same page. So that can turn around in a quick. And knowing that and seeing that Dallas right now average at best, we'll see if they can tighten some things up, get some things going. But one of the surprises is that Washington team, that Jaden Daniels, dude, that guy is a baller. And so they are turning that thing around quick. They've done it on a great season when Dallas is down and the Eagles are down. And so ultimately, I think it's going to be a real interesting year. Baltimore is finding its groove. Buffalo does what Buffalo does. They are beating everybody, and then they just stink it up. So I really think that it's up for anybody this year. Maybe Minnesota. I'm kind of watching to see how they continue to play. But it's going to be fun to see what happens because it's anybody's game.
Yeah, I agree. And just kind of going back through some of these yesterday, I think you're seeing, man, the Falcons are pretty good. They're, playing good against some good teams. You've got the New Orleans Saints kind of coming down to earth a little bit. So are we seeing this new revolutionary thing, or are they just hot with the new system? How about Chicago eking out a win? No, the Rams are struggling, but you're starting to see a little bit of formation there, because I think those coaches are on the hot seat. I was keeping an eye on that Minnesota Green Bay game. You got Jordan Love coming back, put up 389, so he looked good. But man, Minnesota. Some people have been predicting the downfall of Sam Darnold, but man, he just continues to look good. And so the question is, as they get into some of these divisional games, how long can he keep it going? And I've always loved that coach O'Connell there. Pittsburgh took the loss yesterday. I think you're talking about Flacco. That was interesting. You're starting to see the Jets really sputter, and I think they were on the downside of what everybody thought they could be. Starting to see a little back and forth between Salah and Aaron. Philly, I'll give it Philly. I'm happy to see Philly lose because, we do not like Philly. But I do give them a pass being that their number one and their number two option are out. Although I think this can be an avenue to help the spiral.
Where would they be without Barkley right now?
Oh man. Yeah, they'd be bad. Cincinnati, man, John, Andy Dalton, man. I think if you guys would have started him up front, you guys would at least have won 2 games.
Yeah, I would say he played a pretty good game, all things considered. I think Burrow had his back up against the wall, and so he definitely wanted to come out and prove some things. It was a tough game, but they were in the game pretty much the entire time, and so you like a competitive team. You don't have a lot of skill players at every spot for the Panthers, and so they're not going to win convincingly like Buffalo or the Ravens, but you can be in a lot more games with a good quarterback. I think he's an average quarterback. I think he's getting the job done. But yeah, man, I think Burrows needed that win. He was on life support over there, so
yeah,
we'll see how that turns out.
Dad, I want to talk about 2 quarterbacks that are young quarterbacks that are showing frustration. One that I've been real intrigued by is the Chargers. They've got Jim Harbaugh. And Harbaugh, he's going to want to set his system up. He's going to win up front. He's going to do power run game. Well, you're starting to see some unhappiness there with Herbert and they're not letting him pass the ball and him slamming the helmet. Obviously they lost and they're out-tooled against the Chiefs, but starting to see a little bit of frustration there. And then the second quarterback that nobody can really figure it out. It's not necessarily just him, but is Jacksonville and Trevor Lawrence. And that whole thing is they dropped to 0-4 yesterday. Really, I mean, they should have won that game. They had 2 opportunities to close the game out, and they just couldn't convert on third down. So you're starting to see 2 quarterbacks who have been, projected first ballot Hall of Famers, but have just failed to live up to the expectations. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think it's 2 separate things. One era is ending because I think Jacksonville's coach is on the way out. And so this is going to be a very tough year for Trevor. It's just going to get worse and worse, but that's going to end, and hopefully they can find a new coach and coach him up again and, help him to be inspired and encouraged again, because I think he just lost his way. I think he can be okay, but coaching is going to matter. On the flip side, I think Herbert this is a new system, a new philosophy. Harbaugh, we know that he's a winning coach, so he just has to be patient. He's also hurt, and so he's not physically all there. So I think Harbaugh is trying to save him a little bit. And let's run the ball. Let's keep your ankles fresh. But I think you'll see a progression. At the end of the day, they only lost by 7 points, and so they were in the game, and so he knows how to win. So this was not supposed to be their year. This was supposed to be a building year. And so I think you'll see some good wins and then some tough losses. And this was a tough loss because they could have won, but their trajectory are going on 2 different paths right now.
Yeah, I think they're looking good and they've been winning. I think he's just it's going to be at, he's going to have lower stats. He's not going to be put up flashy numbers. And so, that's just something that he's going to have to appeal. He's going to have to swallow. John, what are your thoughts on Trevor Lawrence?
Man, honestly, who wins in Jacksonville? Like,
Yeah.
who's winning in Jacksonville? It's just a tough place to be. It's like the Browns. You look around, you're just like, we have some good players, have some bad players, but nobody's out here supporting the team en masse. Honestly, if I'm Trevor, I'm looking for a new home. God made it work. You played well. Nobody was faulting you. You had some great wins, but I just don't foresee him doing really well in Jacksonville. I think there's some couple good landing places he could go, be really beneficial. I think the Rams are probably going to move on from Goff. That's from my perspective. I mean, from Sanford, but you're looking for the opportunity of like, where's the home that would probably give him a good shot at winning, and I just don't think that's it. That's just my take on it. It's hard to go to Jacksonville and be a hero for anybody. So, but growing pains. You're seeing some other quarterbacks. Daniels is playing well. Stroud's playing well. It's not impossible, but they're also surrounded by fairly good teams, good talent, and so you're starting to see that pay off. The reality is Washington might win the division and not like a really bad win-loss record, like it has been. You drop in there. And I think that really changes a lot of things. I think if you really want to upset Jerry, Washington wins and wins well. And then maybe this is the time, if we're going to be honest, to reevaluate the Cowboys and the process, and maybe it's time to make some changes there. Just my opinion.
Yep.
He's led in a lot of things, but man, it's been tough to watch. They have a lot of good players, and then the defense has now become a little bit more depleted. It's a great division to win. It's getting a lot easier.
Yep.
But it's as easy as it's going to be. So we'll see what happens.
I think the smartest thing Dan Quinn did was he brought in Cliff Kingsbury to run that new style offense, which maybe Cliff isn't the best head coach, which, I mean, he won a good bit, but, maybe he's a better coordinator. And so I think he's really helped Jaden and helped give him a good system for success. And so it'll be interesting to see what type of path does he take, more of the CJ Stroud path, or are they able to sustain it? But if there's a year to win the NFC East, it's this year. But, man, I'll tell you what, watching that Buffalo-Baltimore game last night, I felt like Baltimore was intentional about just being physical. One of the things Dallas, we talk about, lacks is physicality. We're soft. Man, last night, I think Buffalo and Baltimore are physical, but, man, they were roughing Josh Allen up. I mean, Dad, how do you think Jerry felt watching Derrick Henry taking them to the house, 200 plus yards, just tearing it up. And so watching last night, I mean, it's just going to be the same story in the AFC playoffs. But can Baltimore get over the hump, being Kansas City? Can Buffalo get over the hump? And then Cincinnati's a little bit behind the 8 ball. And so I appreciate their shifts because I don't think you can outgun Kansas City. I think you've got to play, rough, pounding ground, win up front. And I think and you run the ball well, play good defense, which I think is more sustainable for Josh in the long run, which we'll see if it fares. But, man, Kansas City, win after win after win. They figured out that formula. So, anyway, hey, let's shift to ministry and leadership. And, Dad, just kind of paint a picture for the question and take us on this journey with it.
Yeah, I was just been watching, culture, been watching. I mean, right now, just with the election looming and watching culture and watching church, how church figures out culture and understanding that the word still does its work and it is sharp and it is piercing. But there's also the flip side, and that's, in ministry, using wisdom and being able to see things and trying to see what's around the corner and adjusting. And we know that the message stays the same, the methods have to change. And one of the things that I've noticed just in the last 2 or 3 years is that in the past, we have coined the slogan, the summer slump. Everybody knew what it meant, not just in ministry, but church. And that's when during the summertime, people would go on vacations and the numbers of attendance would drop. Well, what I've noticed in the last 2, 3 years that the summer slump has really bled into the fall. And so I've kind of been watching this trend, and I've been talking to people, and what it really seems like is during the summertime, people will take a week vacation, and in the past, that's all that they were able to do. And now the trend is, hey, let's take a week vacation in the fall because it's beautiful weather, and let's take long weekends. And so I've noticed that trend on the last 2, 3 years, and I really believe that is a more than a trend. It is now a reality. And so I just thought it was interesting, would be interesting to hear some thoughts on that particular trend, if you see that in your area. And maybe there's some other things that we're beginning to see that would be beneficial for us to be aware of and then begin to adjust. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely the case. I think we're starting to see people take vacations at a different time. I think remote work has also changed some of the environment in which people have flown in and out of church. Knowing that they don't have set office schedules creates a little bit more freedom and mobility, maybe to take more vacation time, but to still log in wherever they're at destination wise and still participate in however that looks like for their family. So I think that's changed Sunday to Sunday, what that looks like. At least in our context, we've seen a lot more sporadic, coming in and coming out. We've also seen online viewership increase as a part of that transitionary fact. I'm not sure as to all the whys, but I would affirm some of that to be true. And we didn't take a huge downturn in summer like maybe historically, but I think that's also geography located. We're in an area that's really nice through the summer. So in the wintertime, people find more reasons to go south and things up here in the mountains. So it probably looks different place to place, but I do think remote work is a big part of that conversation, and people are using their time more effectively. And I also believe that at some level, we're starting to see our culture kind of react against the 60, 70-hour work weeks. And, people are finding more value in being with their family, going and having experiences and things like that, which is kind of dislodged a lot of the rhythmic and rigid scheduling for families, which I think can be a good thing, especially when it comes to overwork. But I think that obviously being together with the saints is necessary, helpful, beneficial. Organizing life around that gathering and being attentive to that is helpful. but it definitely looks way different on the landscape.
I agree too, because I think, Dad, we've talked about this. I feel like in some ways the summer attendance has gone up, and it's kind of shifted to fall, at least in July. Where we'd have a bump back just nationwide in August, where you're starting to see it a little bit now earlier in July. So I think the tension that I'm currently thinking through and feeling through is two things. One, do we make our ministry programming, our ministries, our activities, our what we're calling the church to, do we try to adapt that to make it fit, these new patterns and new habits and rhythms? Or do we just say, hey, this is who we are, this is what we're going to do, and if you're here, great, and if you're not here, that's fine, but we're going to continue doing what we do? Because I think there's a danger in acquiescing too much and leaning too much into that. And then my next thought, as you were talking about that, and question is, do we just kind of accept it for what it is and just, hey, we are always going to be here, we're going to be the consistent word, worship, community? Or do we kind of not preach against it? But I think all pastors are having to preach into this, hey, have some healthy margin between faith, family, sports, etc. You see a lot of sports travel and different things like that. Do we kind of hunker down on, hey, you've got to protect this time of faith and Sabbath with your family and with your local church? I could see some pros and cons of not addressing it and not setting an expectation as a church member, as a follower of Christ, but also going too hard into it. So those, I think, practically are the two things that I'm thinking through is, do we adapt, or do we just keep giving them steak and potatoes and being who we are? And then how do we speak to this from the pulpit? What do y'all think?
Well, I think let me say one thing before we get into that. In regards to these trends that are realities now, 20 years ago, you could have had a true church membership of 150 people, and 100 went to church. That has changed rapidly now. And so you almost have to have, about rather than 150 for 100, it's almost like 250 for 125, because people now are finding that, as long as I go, every other week, or, as long as I go often, I'm okay. And that's interesting, because for the pastor, I think we have to be very careful that we don't judge church by church attendance on Saturday, because we now
Sunday?
have more. I mean, on Sunday, we have more people that we are. So churches can grow, and it doesn't really feel like that maybe on a Sunday morning. However, the responsibility for the pastor is growing and growing and growing, because you do have people that are coming to church, but they're coming every other week or once every 3 weeks. And so, a lot of times you think, well, what can I do? We're not growing. In reality, you are growing. And then we have to look at, well, how's the unity within the church if you got people that don't know each other because they're missing so much? And so I think it's something for pastors and leadership to understand that, to take a step back and realize, because if not, we will just look at Sunday morning attendance and that's it. And we'll begin to judge ourselves on a particular number. And then at the same time, we're working so hard because we have more people, but it's not a reality within our minds. And so we can get to a point where we're fatigued and we're almost fighting against ourselves, because we're fighting against the true number that is a part of the church compared to a number that we see on Sunday morning. And so I think that's something that we have to be at least aware of and understand, because, let me say this very carefully. What is success? And I know none of us here, it's about success or numbers and all, but in one part of our mind, that's something that we always battle with. And numbers is a part of society. And so we're always trying to push back on that. But I think that if we're not careful, we can find ourselves fatigued, working harder and trying to do more and trying to do more and trying to grow the church. In reality, it's growing, but church is just changing now. The dynamics of more finances, like you guys say, people want to go out and do more with their families. A lot of people are going on RVs, long weekends. So you got all these things to contend with, and I think we have to be aware of that for the spiritual health of ourselves.
Mm.
That makes sense?
Yeah. John, any thoughts on the programming or any, preaching from it or adjusting? What do you think?
I think I don't we're not driven to do a Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday night. We meet Sundays in the morning and we meet Wednesday evening. I think it's important to have multiple touch points throughout the week. Some of our groups meet on other nights throughout the week, Thursdays or Fridays as well. So I think you're looking for opportunity to connect people together. But I don't see us changing or necessarily preaching on something different or in a different way to kind of draw people together. I think we're wholly relying on the power of the Holy Spirit to draw people together to worship, to bring conviction for those that maybe don't. And then at the same time, sensitive to push and promote ways to be connected to the church that will create both accountability to be present, either that through service or opportunities to connect with other believers. I find it's too easy through our stream services to provide quote unquote some form or shape of a worship experience event. Maybe they can hear the sermon or whatnot. That's just a fraction of what happens on Sunday morning. I think it's really helpful to remind our people, the things that God gathers the church together is not just to be equipped and taught, although that chief and supreme, we would hold that as a high marker, sing praises together, to pray God's word back to them, to respond together. It's the one another's that can't be exercised from the couch. And although you can hear the sermon, I'm thankful for when saints say, "Hey, we were out of town, but we listened online and it was a great service." But what you can't do from online or the couch is sing to one another. You can't carry the burdens for one another. You can't stir one another up to good love and good works. Those are things that happen through proximity. And instead of maybe retracting or maybe stepping backwards on the expectation for people to join together in fellowship, I would say with the remote work pulled together with this aspect, we have a corner market to see community as essential now in more ways than that could be shared than before. I think it's just the opportunity we have to direct our people towards meaningful relationships with one another and intimate service towards one another, and continue to proclaim those one another's, and trust God's Spirit to draw together His church or bring conviction if somebody is forsaking the worship time, to gathering together of the saints. But also, as you said, not necessarily a program change, at least for our church, but it's definitely casting a vision that church is not just hearing the sermon and singing songs. It's gathering together with the saints and encouraging the one another's when we gather together with the saints, that is impossible if you don't come.
Yeah, and for different contexts, is community churches versus community churches. I think the old way of thinking was, hey, the more you're doing, the better, and the more people are coming to stuff, the better. Where one of the things I'm finding with Gen Z is, in our young adult ministry, we'll have our main gathering time, and people, hey, let's do this, let's do that. Like, they were doing their own thing. They didn't want to do it. And so we like, okay, instead of trying to do all these other things, let's just put our eggs in this basket. And for churches, that would be the Sunday basket. So maybe the busier churches, rather than keep on forcing things that you've always done, try not to spread it out too much and just really push Sunday mornings, or for our context, a Sunday morning and a Wednesday night that still, it just fits our community. But another thing that I would inject into this, and this is just me thinking out loud, we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but I think we really need to, John, I'll just, for full transparency, I think we all hold to the expositional approach. And last week we were talking about working in vision into our preaching, and making sure it's biblical. But I do think there are some basic biblical principles that we would all agree upon that can allow us to have emphasis in our preaching. For instance, a lot of times pastors, or one thing I try to really always emphasize is, hey, we're going to jump into a specific text, but generally speaking, here at this church, we believe the power of God's word, because, studies show that if you get into God's word 4 or more times a week, it has this type of impact on your faith life, on your spiritual life. So rather than just telling them to read, hey, here's why you should read, and here's what it can do for your physical life, for your spiritual life, in between you and God, kind of giving them the why behind the what. And so I think we could have an emphasis, whatever text we're preaching on, to, hey, you've got to have God's word in your life. Here's the power that it can bring your family. With that said, I think we also have to have an emphasis for Gen Zs, millennials, Gen Alpha as they're coming up on why church. So many of them are with us or boomers or Gen X. It's understood language. Oh, we know why we go to church. And even though millennials or Gen Z might say that they do, I found that a lot of them have a more legalistic approach, a check the box, going to the gym approach. Why should you go to church? Why do you go to church? And it's, for me or for us in our context, it would be coming back to the basics and just, making that vision of the Acts 2. Hey, why do we come to church? To submit under the authority of the word. And hey, if you will consistently commit to submitting you and your family under the word, it will change your life. It'll change your marriage. Hey, if you will, make community a priority, here's how it can affect your life, your marriage, your children. And so making an emphasis on why church is important, to the point where they'll say, yeah, I like going out of town and I like camping, but at the end of the day, the value of those things is not greater than the value of me and my family being at church. And so for me, I think the end goal would be reprogramming how they approach church, how they approach the word, so that they will prioritize faith and church attendance over some of those things in the long run. Not to say, too, that people that do those things don't value, but that's just something I've been noticing. So,
And I'd tag in there too that there's some polling research come together that Gen Zers are actually more inclined to attend. If they do attend, they are more consistent than the previous Generation X or millennials, or however you define that category of people. So I think some of the fact is that they're being washed from some of the belief that something out there is going to be just as good or better, looking for authentic community as a pushback against the online constant barrage of information. And I believe, maybe I'm just overly optimistic in it, I believe this generation has the opportunity to restabilize some of the church participation in a meaningful way, as a maybe a pendulum swing back against some of the online dumping that's happened in our time. That only time will tell on that. But I think, and we can't bank on that. Like, oh, they'll just get tired of the world and they'll come running back to the church. But I do believe there is some fatigue that's happening with social and online everything, whether that be work or other stuff, which I think positions the church in a good place, where face-to-face, life-on-life activity is key and necessary and can't be pushed off, no matter how many online pastors churches hire or anything else. There's just the proximity that's necessary for saints to worship and serve together. And so I think we're in a good spot moving ahead.
I agree. One more thing, Dad, you can close this out, John, and this will be a conversation for another day. While the one thing, though, that I will say that I think we need to start opening up our mind of the online stuff is how we do discipleship or training or equipping, meaning some of our people that are coming on Sundays and they're coming on Wednesdays, but you ever have that meeting or that training session or that parent forum, and you're like, oh, man, we missed you being in the room. I do think how Gen Z, millennials consume content, we can adapt to. And so whether that be, you start to see a lot of churches kind of shift to more podcast form, where they're talking about content from the sermon or parent equipping, or, hey, you don't have to necessarily be in the room to get this, but you can take it to the gym with you and listen on the treadmill. I do think that is some future, not primary, those are secondary things, but I do think there is some value in that. Dad, any final thoughts on this whole topic before we go out?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that. You look at children's ministry, the way it's done right now, especially the ones that are doing good work, is a little different than the way they did it 30 years ago. And so, again, we started this with the methods and the message. And at the end of the day, it's the message that changes everything. And the methods are for the message. And so we got to remember the word does a great work. And so we got to turn it loose and let it speak on behalf of God and the church, and people will be saved from it.
Yep. Same message, different methods. That applies to sports and to church. All right, everybody, have a good day. We'll see you next week.